Welcome to In the Gutter, a podcast that is all comics, all bangers, all the time, with story expert Lonnie Diane Rich and superhero scholar Joshua Unruh. One of the hosts has read almost no superhero comics, and the other has read almost all of them. We'll let you sort out which is which. And now, In the Gutter.
So yes, I'm sorry, what does your unsweetened seltzer water mint mojito have to do with this bird?
Traditionally, so supposedly the ortolan is absolutely delicious, right? Like it's one of the best things you can put in your mouth, supposedly. I've never had one, but supposedly.
Yes.
But because it's such a decadent, monstrous thing to create, traditionally you are supposed to eat it with a napkin or your handkerchief over your head to hide your shame from God while you're eating it. And I bring this up to say that if human beings did that to eat this delicious bird, I can breathe through my nose to get the best part of this sparkling water.
All right. And nothing's going to waste. I 100% support that. But I think probably that's a decent transition into talking about Captain America this week.
Sure.
I'm not going to get a segue from this tormented, delicious bird and your mint mojito seltzer into Captain America. There's no connection there. I'm just like, I'm
going to ask a question.
It's time to move into
of
the
our
show.
Listeners, just in case this becomes an outtake. God help us all. But if there is like a Latin word for an argument that is made logically, but also with ridiculous, over-the-top bullshit, but it's still logical. But also, like, I'm going to deal with this thing that's like a 2 by turning it up to 12 to prove my point at the 2. If there's a word for that, listeners, let me know. Because I think that's what I just did. And I think it's my new favorite, like, rhetorical style.
Yes. No, absolutely. There should be a name for that. If there is not a name for that, listeners, definitely get back to us and tell us what it should be. Like, let's name that. Because I'm going to tell you, Joshua, I love you dearly. Not the first time I've had that kind of argument from you.
No! Absolutely
it's
not.
Kind of your signature move.
Well, now to be fair, you're usually broadly when I've done this, I feel like we're probably talking about superhero stuff, which to be fair is sort of naturally turned up to 12. So if I'm going to turn that around,
itself exactly,
and apply that to anything in real life, I'm doing that thing. Which, by the way, we're going to do today. I have political feelings, as you'll be shocked to discover about
I am not
issue.
At all surprised to discover that you have political feelings.
Listen, Captain America, Red Skull, Shield, and my little lefty heart are going to keep being a thing, I think, as we go through this espionage story. And you thought we wouldn't have a segue.
I thought we wouldn't have a segue, but you pulled that out rather nicely. All right, so today we are reading Captain America Winter Soldier, written by Ed Brubaker. All the credits are in the show notes. This is issue 2 of Out of Time, which is a 6-issue run that we're doing, plus 1. We're going to be doing a total of 7 issues of Cap before we move on to the JLA comic, which is coming in the second half of season 1 of In the Gutter. So that hopefully brings everybody more or less up to date on what we're doing.
And if you need a reminder of issue 7, the reason we're doing issue 7 is it's kind of an interlude issue. Like it doesn't, it very specifically doesn't belong to either side. So it sort of
functions as a coda to this story.
Well, it's more like, and we'll talk about it when we get there, because you're gonna, it's for you, like in a real way, because there's gonna be some like names dropped, that are, and one in particular that's really important to like Captain America's history and is going to become a thing like in this story. He's going to become a thing in this story. But a lot of people would be like, I'm sorry, who? Because it was like 1983, 1984, right? So if you come to this from the MCU, or if you come to this just as, not somebody who is ancient and been reading comics since they were 4, you're going to be like, who is this? And they have a whole issue to kind of roll that out. And I think, just for what it's worth, it's not a waste, right? Because there's a lot of poignancy that would be lost and a lot of parallels that I don't want to get into. But that's the explanation. It felt more like it belonged at the end of a thing than at the beginning of a thing. So I wanted to tack it on to the end of Out of Time instead of at the beginning of Winter Soldier, the actual arc called Winter Soldier. See episode 1 for all that confusion.
You know what? Here's the thing. I spend a lot of my time trying to organize things. Like I have this part of me that like needs things to be organized to a certain extent, you know, in order for me to feel like comfortable. And I have given up. I have given up on mentally wrapping my mind around how any of this stuff goes. I am just going to hop on the back of this horse with you, Joshua, and maybe go into the summary. You think?
Yeah, absolutely.
Jack, roll the summary music. In Captain America Winter Soldier Out of Time, issue number 2, we open with 3 dudes hanging out somewhere beneath Manhattan, wondering why their boss hasn't called. Then a frustrated dude in Red Skull cosplay emerges from the shadows and tells them to quit whining and just wait.
Asterisk, that's Crossbones. Put some respect on his name. We'll get to it. Okay, go on.
Red Skull cosplay until I hear different. All right. Meanwhile, in a flashback across town, Cap dreams about Bucky taking a shot to the gut in World War II and wakes up screaming. Then he's confused. That's not how Bucky died. That never actually happened. While he's trying to figure it out, he gets a beep from Sharon. Something's happened. She's going to pick him up on the roof in a SHIELD helicarrier because we don't do anything less than dial to 12 in the MCU. Or not in the MCU, the Marvel Comics universe. They tell him Red Skull has died and they need Cap's DNA in order to confirm it's really Red Skull. For reasons that I am sure Joshua will explain later.
I got you,
Red
boo.
Skull... I know you do. Apparently, Red Skull was living inside a clone of Steve. And welcome to comics, people. Cap doesn't believe that it's really Red Skull dead on the table, but he gives his DNA to an understandably nervous SHIELD doctor and then goes to check out the crime scene. He recognizes Red Skull's mask and begins to believe that this might all be real. Cap flashes back to when he received the assignment to take down Red Skull in the war and then stares down at the bloody crime scene, likely wondering if the job he was created to do is finally done. One of the SHIELD techs finds a receiver with a signal connecting to a place in Manhattan, and Cap and Sharon go to check it out. While hunting through Manhattan's underground, Sharon admits that Fury wondered if Cap killed Skull. Sharon says she knows Cap's not an assassin, but Cap still isn't convinced that's really Skull being autopsied anyway. Their conversation is interrupted when they find the 3 dudes waiting on instructions and Cap starts a fight. Sharon calls for backup while Cap knocks out the dudes and gets some intel from them. They're from AID, an offshoot of AIM. The man wearing the skull mask sees what's Crossbones?
Crossbones.
Red Skull cosplay sees what's happening and escapes while Cap cuts the power to the bomb the guys activated before being taken out. Meanwhile, Fury and company discover that the device they found used to house a cosmic cube, so whoever killed Skull has that now too. The man in the skull mask calls in and reports that Skull has been killed, but that doesn't mean that they have to abort their plans. He instructs his partners to set a timer and tell Paris to do the same. Tonight, he promises the world will burn in Red Skull's memory. All right, so overall response. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and just kind of like give you my general response. This does seem to have the flavor of the connective tissue between one act and the next. We're moving from this like really incredible, starting gun of story into this longer arc, and I think it's totally fine for that. We're grinding through story. It's a very action-based issue, which is usually not my favorite thing, but we've also got these really strong emotional beats underneath everything, so that's keeping me going. I have to say, I don't think I've ever read anything by Brubaker, but so far, like him. He's an efficient storyteller. We're getting more of Cap's war trauma. We're getting his relationship with Sharon, Fury's secret agenda, this team of idiots from AID, Cap's suspicions about what Skull was really up to, the threat of this being bigger than just New York, and it's all in under 30 pages. There's so much going on, and we're also doing all of this while hitting the emotional beats, Cap's trauma. We're getting the relationship. We're getting all of these things, even his relationship with Fury we're seeing in there. And everything is given this weight in 2 or 3 lines in the middle of a scene that's about something else. Like, it is unbelievable. Brubaker's got like 12 plates spinning at every given time, and I really like it. And the thing is that so much is going on here that we've kind of forgotten about Lucan.
Yes. Which I think is on purpose. Like he's just kind of like, we can't forget that he exists, but also we kind of can't be bothered right now. Like the problems are more immediate right here in our face, which keeps everything feeling like there's this big forward momentum, right?
Right.
Even though we're doing a little bit of like sort of police procedural stuff, which obviously there's like a whole, sort of subgenre of that, that has been popular for years. So like, obviously that can be action packed, but not in a Captain America story. What? More on that in a bit. This is one of my thoughts actually. But like, so you're right. There's like connective bits. We have to do some investigation. I personally really appreciate that there's some action in this issue because there wasn't a whole lot except for the flashback, to Cap being over the top, because they're superhero stories. Thank you, Brubaker, for not forgetting.
Right. That's what we come here for. Just because it's not like, here's the thing, like the fact that I am interested in the MCU and interested in these comics and all that kind of stuff is despite the fact that I am not an actor. Like action scenes just generally bore me unless they're done with a real strong connection to story or whatever. And I get bored in the MCU. I mean, the 20 minutes of lasers and punching at the end of every Marvel movie, I don't care. But this I actually felt like because we just seen Sharon come to Cap and be like, hey, you're beating the shit out of people like a little bit too much, like turn it down a little bit. And then we have Cap flying at these guys. And there was a tension in there that as Sharon's watching, he's going to go over the line. I don't know that he necessarily did. Because I don't know where the line is in the text of these superhero comics. But I thought it was a really interesting like layer of dramatic tension underneath, an action scene that we also need. Brubaker is layering the shit out of this stuff. It's amazing.
I want to shout out to Epting on pencils in this, and also Lark on the flashbacks, but especially Epting in the present stuff, because Brubaker is a master. Like he knows what he's doing, and he's always got like multiple things going on in every crime and espionage bit, and it's always anchored emotionally. Like one of his crime books called Criminal is like generational at times, like in this one family or in this community. Like he's always doing that. But if you don't have somebody that can meet you with the emotional visuals also, which again, I don't love Epting's action stuff. It's not bad. It's just not everything I would like it to be. It's a little stiff, but he's doing the stuff we really need, like these concerned looks between Fury and Sharon, and this kind of like ironic smirk from Cap. Like, are you friggin' kidding me? Just he's doing it. Epting is meeting Brubaker's story where it needs to be. Yeah,
that's the thing 100%. Is that comic book artists need to be actors, and they need to be able to. It's kind of amazing what they're able to do.
And to your point with the action again, listen up, a-holes listeners heard me say this to you, that you deserve to be bored during a lot of the MCU action stuff, because it's not usually very anchored in anything that's actually going on, emotionally. And when these things work, that they should be like it should be, which is going to be an interesting conversation when we mirror this in JLA, which is a much more plot driven and not as much character and emotion driven, but it still happens, right? It's different and it's not as deep, but it's still there. Like you will see. So I really appreciate that we're this is the all bangers thing, right? We're reading a thing that is doing all of these things all at the same time. So we can just be very impressed and not worry that we're in bad hands. Like they'll handle it. We're not going to be disappointed at some point,
All right, so I probably to nobody's surprise, like I completely screwed up everything last week. I got so confused over the cover art. When we were talking about title page versus cover art, I kept talking about This issue's like cover art, I guess, with the body outline, or maybe that's the title page, except it doesn't have a title on it, so I get completely confused. So fuck it, here's the cover art, I guess. We've got a blue border of a night sky, a red colorizing image of Cap looking really, really grim. We've got the body outline of what I presume is Red Skull, a slash of red going from Red Skull's chest area up over Cap's face, but it's layered over, it's like in a top layer on the thing. So it's feels like really simple art, but it's really interesting. And once again, we have these two like superimposed over each other. And while we're here, last week's cover art was a generic shot of Cap throwing his shield, Sharon on one side, Nick Fury on the other, both of them armed to the teeth, and what appears to be a world on fire in the background with Red Skull's face coming out of the smoke and flames. So there you go. That's what I should have talked about last week. Did not remember it for last week. So here we are.
Okay, no, you're fine. Because as for screwing up, I kind of did too. Like, again, last episode, we talked about all these different versions and collections, and I honestly wasn't sure what you were looking at. And I would rather... I mean, we're not in the same room where I can look over your shoulder, so I would rather react. I'm doing the
Kindle volume, and you, I think, have the paper... Like, do you have a paper one, or...
Yeah, but that doesn't mean we have the same
No, that's
version.
What I mean, that we wouldn't have the same thing because we have different versions of it.
Well, even if you have a digital version of one of the collections, it may be a different one of the collections than I have in paper. It's because that's a whole other thing we didn't even talk about, is that the difference between digital and paper editions. But speaking from that, I would rather... like react to whatever you're reacting to and just assume that it's a difference in our collection.
It may be,
do like
or I could be doing the wrong thing.
Actually.
Oh, actually, yeah. No,
yeah,
I appreciate
that.
I appreciate that. Follow me down the wrong way. I get it.
But this is this does make so much more sense.
Yes.
No shade, but it does make so much more sense as a cover for issue 2, because it's like a living legend surveys the scene of a dead nightmare. I mean, and a thing we've talked about before, because there's such a dearth of good villains in the MCU that like great heroes are somewhat defined by how good their villains are.
Right.
And when you combine that with my personal appreciation for opposite number villains, we will talk about that a bit more. It's a really powerful cover image. Like, and to me, as it makes up for how generic the first one was, which it's a good, like, it's a pretty cover, but it's kind of generic. And it's because they literally couldn't tell us anything about the story without giving it away.
Exactly.
So I understand the problem.
Yeah.
But
and
we're in it now.
The thing that is really kind of interesting about that cover, though, and that I kind of love, and this is last week's cover with Red Skull's ghostly face hovering over everything, that a presence, rather than a physical presence, like a spiritual and emotional presence is hanging over everybody, which kind of feels ghostly, and like someone who may have died. So it feels like there's this tiny little Easter egg in there. There's a little hint, if you're willing to give Brubaker the credit for being the writer that he is, you could look at that and see, oh, he told us right there that Red Skull was going to die.
There will be levels of people being haunted by the Red Skull throughout this story. We're actually going to meet another person who is deeply haunted by the Red Skull in this issue. We'll talk more about him in a minute. Your very dismissive Red Skull cosplay.
Red Skull cosplay. That's what it looks like to me. I'm just saying, I calls them as I sees them. All right. So the interior art, I love the difference in the flashbacks. I love how much rougher the edges are, that they are somewhat, grunged up by memory. Some details are blurred and black and white. Yeah.
Like a news serial, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Like he's remembering it through that context. All the soldiers Cap is punching look exactly the same. They wouldn't look any different to him, and when Cap wakes up, details are clear again. We've got that color. We've got that blue night, lots of shadow, really interesting stuff. We've got a great action sequence, but even the classic comic book, like Kapow stuff, doesn't make it feel dated, which usually that kind of stuff does for me. I understand that it is a very particular comic book aesthetic, that you don't want to necessarily lose, but you do want to update. And I feel like they updated it really nicely.
You're going to have a lot of a lack, I guess, a lot of a lack. I don't know if that makes sense. A dearth,
yes.
let's say, of sound effects. Like they won't be completely missing, but they won't be here.
Yeah.
Which cuts both ways, honestly. It can, to someone who is sort of new to comics, it can feel a little dated because it starts to look like your Sunday morning, right, in the newspaper comics that you read. But in some places, I would say you're poorer for it, right? Like sound effects matter. We can't hear any of this stuff.
Yeah.
And when you give a sound effect to something, you are saying, look at this, it's really important.
Right.
And we could even talk about a book like Incredible Hercules that makes jokes with its sound effects, right? We may read that someday, so I'm going to put a pin in that and just come back to it when you get to react to it. But I get why they didn't do it here. We're kind of going for a more realistic feel, a more grounded feel. But yeah, that lack of more cartoony or more comic book aspects. The last thing I would say, because I agree with all of that, like this interior art continues to be great. Getting a different artist with similar but vital differences to do the flashbacks is a great idea. And when it comes to the coloring of those, what I really appreciated about this is it's Cap's dream, but it is colored the same as the flashbacks from the previous issue. So we get to the end and Bucky's dying. And those of us who are kind of in the know are like, even before Steve's doing it, we're like, that's not how Bucky died. But there's nothing to let us know this is a dream instead of a flashback or a memory, except for him waking up. And it's really jarring. And it's another subtle hint of where some things are going as the story progresses. I can tell you. I
love that. And I have to say that, like, one of the things over on Endless, the Sandman podcast that I do about Neil Gaiman's Sandman was I would talk about how Neil Gaiman as a writer would always use like every part of the pig. That's kind of become my refrain for when he would put something in at the beginning and then it seemed like a nothing little detail, but it would end up being vital toward the end of the issue. And also using a DC history and all sorts of stuff going on in there. And I see that too. And this is one of the things that I have come to really value and respect in comic book art is that when we talk about every part of the pig, we talk about every part of the pig. Like there is nothing that these artists will not use as a tool, including the ways in which they will use those sound effects. When you're talking about the sound effects being part of the joke. And when we talk about the name of this podcast, In the gutter is literally the negative space between the panels. And often that will be used in a very particular way. In the dreams and the flashbacks, it's black, whereas on the other pages, it's white, So we get a sense of meaning in every little detail. And I can only begin to imagine, I'm sure I'm catching like probably maybe 30% of what's actually there in the art that these artists are doing. And so it's one of the things where I love to sit and talk about the art because I've traditionally been a person that like when I watch a movie, I listen to it. I want the story beats. I don't really care about the visuals. I'm not really that much of a visual person. When I write my books, I don't spend that much time on visuals. It's a weakness I've had to really work on. And working with comic books where you have such limited amount of space for this story to happen that the artists really have to carry at least half of the weight of what is going on. Like all of those the acting that they do, the ways in which they will draw something that will give nuance and meaning. And if you're willing to sit there and actually look at the art, you can pull so much out of it. So as an art form, I think comics are absolutely fascinating, especially for me as a writer with a weakness with visuals. To me, I learned so much from all of this, and I find it so incredibly valuable. But comics are treated, and kind of viewed as like this cheap thing that nerdy grown men read in their mother's basements kind of bullshit. And this is real art work. Like the stuff that these guys are doing is real narrative. It's real story. It's very cool. And I would like to see it appreciated a little bit more outside of people who know what comics are that like give a little damn respect because these guys are really doing amazing narrative work.
I have a lot of responses to this. I mean,
and when I say guys,
right.
let me take the gender out of that. They've all been men. all of them for the ones that I've read, but I know that I'm sure there are women out there doing that. So this group of incredible artists is bringing that. I want to take the gender out of that because I'd like to see a space for more women doing the artwork in these things.
So, okay, so many, yes. Let me respond to many things because I do think that it's just for people at home who are maybe tuning into this and aren't big superhero comic people, but are coming along with us on this journey. I want to caution you. We are doing all bangers for a reason. So that stereotype about these are trash media that are meant for mouth-breathing basement dwellers, not entirely unearned, not like, not certainly not what we want to use to characterize the top
I feel
of
it's
the
unfair.
form. Yeah. But there's a lot of that. I'm just, again, one of the things I love about superhero comics, especially told over years and decades, is that you've got fucking deadlines and not everything's gonna stick. So you're just like, try it.
And so much, yeah.
We usually look at the stuff that stuck, right? And it's almost like a survivor bias, almost like, this is what the art form is. And it's like, this is what the art form can be. And that is not to denigrate it as a whole. I'm just saying.
That's true of everything.
Yes.
What is it?
That's the
Sturgeon's Law, 95% of everything is crap. I mean,
exactly. That was where I was headed, is that like it's worth remembering, but it's also worth remembering that that's true for novels, it's true
movies,
for TV,
literary
it's for
novels, everything. Yes.
And yeah, again, respect on the names of illustrators. They do way more than 50%. Like they're not just time spent, but also it's very easy as a writer to drop something in like Sharon gives an ironic look, and then they have to like turn that into something.
Figure out how to sell that in a
Yeah. So they're definitely, and this is not to denigrate the efforts of Brubaker at all, because he's very good and he is doing multiple things always at the same time. And that is, as a writer myself, not easy, but yeah, when it comes to comics, you usually have to like lean quite a lot harder on the illustrator. Last bit, because this is worth pointing out, that next season, one of our stories is going to have women involved in the creation. Right?
Wonderful.
Now, I didn't do this on purpose, and I honestly didn't even think about it. I just got excited about the stuff that I wanted you to read and that I thought you would enjoy, right? However, I will say thank you already to our delightful patrons who have turned this into an excuse. This entire podcast has become an excuse for me to make you read Sailor Moon, which we're going to do, friends, because I love Sailor Moon. And Takeuchi is herself a woman, obviously, and she does 99% of manga's complicated, but because they usually have a stable of artists, but she's the vision, it's a very feminized version of superheroes. So we're going to get to that stuff. It's a bit of an oversight that I just got overexcited, but it's worth, saying we need to ungender this because we're going to get to them, friends. We're going to get to them.
Well, and also, step outside of classic American culture as well.
Oh, yeah.
I think that I would absolutely love to do that. But while we are here with Captain America, let's go ahead and talk about this story a little bit. So what are your thoughts on how this particular issue evolved narratively?
Well, it's great. I mean, we can just beat that drum. It's excellent, and it's going to continue to be excellent. I will start with the opposite number villain, right? Because this is going to let me talk about Crossbones a little bit, as well as Red Skull, obviously. Right. So you see I love opposite number villains. And so I don't know if I heard that somewhere, if I honestly don't, because I've been saying it for years. I don't know where I got it, if I'm responsible. But basically your opposite number villain is very similar to your hero, but for one or two like major divergences,
like a fatal flaw or a choice. It's similar to the doppelganger antagonist.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
Yeah.
The reason, so doppelgangers traditionally, right, tend to be very much evil twin sort of thing, like really similar, right? Which we do kind of have here between Red Skull and Cap, right?
Yeah.
But opposite number, the reason I use that more is it's a little more expansive as a concept, right? So using very briefly like Batman's Rogues Gallery as an example, all of his best villains really focus on an aspect of Batman's personality and then say, yeah, but what if we went a little too damn far with it? Right?
Right. Virtue taken to excess becomes vice. Mm-hmm.
So, yes. So his commitment to justice becomes a commitment to justice by chance in Two-Face, or his commitment to order and saving lives becomes a commitment to chaos and murder in the Joker, that kind of thing, right? So obviously we have that in Red Skull, and it's like a big neon sign painted on it, like that Captain America's training and introduction to the world stage in the 616 was expedited by the fact that the Red Skull was out there doing that job for the Nazis way too fucking well. Like, catch up. Like, we're behind, which is kind of cool because it's also true for the war as a whole. Like America was, the Allies as a group, but especially America, where we were like, we don't want to be in it. Shit, we're in it, playing catch up to a certain extent, right? But this is where I get to tell you just a little about Crossbones. Crossbones is the man that you are referring to as Red Skull cosplay.
Red Skull cosplay, yes.
He's like a long-term Cap villain and wasn't always tied to Red Skull, but has been tied to Red Skull during the most important stuff that has involved him, right? And what's really fascinating about him to me is he's also a reflection of Cap to an extent, because the Red Skull was largely a strategist and tactician. Like, he was operating at running squads and platoons and battalions, kind of. He's a mastermind, right? And Steve's no fool, but he's not a mastermind. He's more boots on the street. And from that perspective, Crossbones is very much like the physical Red Skull in a way. And what's really fascinating to me about that is that Crossbones would probably not describe himself as a Nazi. He's not. He doesn't ascribe to Nazism. He's like there for Red Skull. Like, it's a total cult of personality for him, which is why he's like, we're going to burn the world down in memory of this man that I hold in high esteem, right? And again, I am not interested in humanizing Nazis, so I only want to draw that distinction for character purposes. That really, between Red Skull, the tactician and mastermind and symbol, and Crossbones, the boots on the street, I will punch your teeth in, kind of aspect of thing, together, they are like a really good dark reflection of Captain America. And I love that shit. And we're going to get a lot of that. And I wanted to specifically refer to that in reflection terms, because we're seeing so much of that in the last issue.
Absolutely. I love that. And I'm really interested in seeing more from this dude. I mean, clearly he was the one who was supposed to stand out. He was going to be at least marginally important, more than the other three guys that got beaten up, in that circumstance. He got away. He was able to do this. He was like in Red Skull's memory. He's wearing a skull, face mask. It felt very,
and he's more committed.
To me. Yes.
But he's also like he's the guy at the beginning who was like, you guys would be dead if the boss heard you say this. Sit your ass tight. Like, he never wavers. His faith in the Red Skull never wavers. Even when the skull is dead, he's like, well, fuck it. We're still doing
this thing.
Doesn't matter. Yeah.
Oh my God. Well, speaking of Red Skull being dead, that is a huge part of, what's going on, dealing with that. And I mean, the thing is that, yes, this is a villain, but this is also someone that Cap has tied his identity to for so long. And it made me think of this William Faulkner quote that I love, which is, the past isn't dead. It isn't even past. Right. And I just want to say, for the record, I know that quote because of John Green. He says it all the time. I don't read Faulkner. I think I read some Faulkner in like high school, but I'm not trying to like step up my street cred or anything. It's just that particular quote has always stood out to me. And the thing that I love, once again, we're talking about trauma and dealing with that trauma. Trauma doesn't go anywhere ever. The best thing you can do with it is process it. But those flashbacks, those moments where you relive what happened, they never stop. And this was, written some 60 years after Cap went into the ice. He's almost like 80 years old now, or over 80 years old now. Unprocessed trauma remains fresh as the day it happens. It waits for you to come back to it. But if you never go back to it, and it does seem like Cap has not really been processing this, it has been coming for him, but he has not been working through it, talking through it, examining it of his own volition. If you don't go back to it, eventually the trauma comes for you. And Cap's trauma is coming for him. So he has an internal antagonist, and that he doesn't want to think about this stuff. He doesn't want to face this stuff, but it is coming for him and it is making him face it. And then his external antagonist, which is tied into everything that happened during that time for him, has been his entire identity all this time, is now dead. So processing all of that, where he's been able to focus this externally, and now, like you say, the best, villains will reflect what is going on internally, but they give him something externally he can punch. Now he's lost the external thing that he can punch, so he's just punching fucking everything.
Yes, and he's flailing, right? Like, that's part of the deal. He's just like, I don't buy it. And part of that is because the Red Skull has died multiple times before. Like, part of that is sort of what you might call institutional knowledge for Captain America. Like, yeah, I'll fucking believe it when I see it, and even then I won't believe it. Is a legitimate response.
Yeah.
It's like an almost genre savvy response from someone in the story, but doesn't go to the point of sort of self-parody or whatever.
Yeah.
I really appreciate that. Like, yeah, I've seen it before, right? Let me just because I have a thought that I haven't quite finished yet, but I'm interested in your thought. But in order to get there, it's probably worth talking about the clone body, right?
Absolutely, please do talk about that, because that was out of left field for me, and I was like, wait a minute, he is literally Cap.
So physically, yes. So what? Not originally,
right?
Originally, he was Johann Schmidt. Bellboy. Like, it was a real like it was a real Pygmalion thing for him, where somebody was like, Hitler was like, I can turn anybody into a super Nazi. It's no big deal. I know what's up. I know what Nazism is. Wow. I can turn anybody into the best Nazi. Next person that walks through the door, I'm going to turn into a super Nazi. Bellhop Johann Schmidt walks through the door, and he's like, that's my motherfucker. And then becomes the Red Skull.
Damn, that's tragic.
Yes, I hadn't actually thought about that, but here's this, fresh-faced,
kid,
whatever.
Right, this bellhop, probably early 20s, right? Walking in, just happens to cross Hitler on a bad day, which I guess is every day with Hitler. And then
well, for everybody else.
For everybody else. And then gets turned into this thing that has also apparently lived off and on, from what I'm gathering from what you're telling me, for 80, 100 years now, and is in this endless locked in battle. Wow. I mean, that is tragic. When you think that this isn't somebody who went and sought this out, this happened to him.
And if I were going to be a little cynical about the American dream, I would say it's a little tragic.
Oh, absolutely.
Steve also,
absolutely tragic. Yeah.
He is in that way like a mirror of the Red Skull, but he was going for it, like lying about his name and lying about his physical fitness. To get in the army,
not to be Captain America. Becoming Captain America was something that kind of happened to him. I mean, he consented when he went through the process, but yeah.
No, totally. Yeah. I mean, let's just say there's some interesting, parallels there. And the short version is the Red Skull died, and he actually died more or less of old age in a fight with Captain America that he had aged Cap to his proper age, like to his actual physical age. And so they're in physical battle, and Cap refuses to kill him, and he dies basically of being 80 years old and fighting, physically. Dies in Cap's arms. And then you're like, but how did he get a clone body? Well, Arnim Zola did it. I mean, that's it's a little anticlimactic, but it's also like, that's Arnim Zola's whole deal. Like, I do, genetics and
job.
Biomedicine. If I can get one drop of blood from Captain America, hell yeah, I'm going to put Red Skull in there. And then there was an accident with Red Skull's favorite weapon, where it's a poison gas that he loves, and he accidentally breathed it in, and his now super soldier constitution kept him from dying, but it horribly disfigured him into a red. Normally it would disfigure whoever died, and they would die with a Red Skull face. He lived because he had Steve's, super soldier constitution, but it still transformed his face.
So he actually looked like Steve in the beginning, and then became a Red Skull again, because what you are is what you are is what you are, and it will always emerge.
And it used to be a mask.
Right?
Yeah. Originally, it was a mask, and for a long time, we had no idea. Like, we never saw him without the mask, and when we finally did, it was a big deal. Yeah. And then he gets Steve's face, and then shortly after that, gets his as you say, true face, right? And the reason I wanted to, make that clear to you, but also I've been reading a book called The Body Keeps the Score. I'm very late to the game on it, right?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Bessel van der Kolk, everybody look it up. Bessel van der Kolk wrote The Body is the Score. If The Body Keeps the Score, if you have any experience of trauma, which I cannot imagine any of us that don't, especially after the last 2 to 5 years, that is absolutely a must read. So highly recommend it. I will go ahead and put a link in the show notes.
This is not a finished thought. It's just something I started thinking about. But realizing how much your trauma literally lives in your physical body, gets the hormones and get bound up in your body and will loosen. And just like, so when you think, I wasn't even thinking about that. Where did that come from? Something physical.
Your body made that happen.
Came loose and hit your bloodstream and hit your brain. And now it's happening again. Yeah. And so, like I say, not a finished thought, but it is interesting to wonder what that's like for a body that has been put to the mutagenic effects of a super soldier serum. Like Cap's physiology is he's not inhuman, but he's peak human. Like, what does that mean when it comes to things like trauma response and stuff like that? I don't know. I don't think that was on Brubaker's radar in the early 2000s in the way that it might be if we were doing this story now. But it's kind of an interesting question that occurred to me when we were talking about the same body, the same genetic body, but with a very different lived experience.
Yeah, like that in itself is a whole world of philosophy just waiting to happen. Right. In a sense, a science fiction tale, because there's a lot of elements of that. And the great philosophical science fiction asks those questions, things that are not possible now, so we don't think about it, but they go into the what if, what if you have the physical body, of a super soldier, but you're just a nasty, broken Nazi inside. Like, what does that do? Yeah. How do you respond to that? Because the body, so much, we feel like everything about how we feel and who we are is in our brain and in our mind, but it is the whole body as
it's a whole picture,
system working together. Which brings us back to these flashbacks, right? We have this, we have him having this dream about Bucky being shot in the gut when that's not what happened to Bucky. He wakes up and he's like, well, that's not what happened to Bucky. But of course, Red Skull was shot, but he was shot in the chest. And the thing that I absolutely love about this is that instead of making a straight, clear line from Cap's dream to Red Skull, Brubaker gives us a messy one, Yeah. And I kind of
like
that.
A subconscious might do. Right?
Like a subconscious might do, And Skull is a living embodiment of Cap's trauma. He's living in Cap's clone body, as we've discussed. Now he's dead. And Cap wonders if that means that he can walk away from all of this. And he can't. He clearly can't. He has to process what happened to him, but he's resisting it. He just wants it over. But also, one of the things I love about this is that Cap is wondering if he can walk away from this, but he never says that. But we know it, because the hint is there when he says, I was created to stop Red Skull, and then he just leaves that there. It's so elegant. And again, that's what In the Gutter is, right? It is what is unsaid, it is what is not drawn. It's what's happening in the negative space where you can pick up so much of this stuff. I thought it was so cool.
It's really great. The idea of what would Steve do if he weren't captaining is really interesting. I think it harkens back to his discussion of he wishes he were around for the space program. In the first issue, he talked about that. And in that case, he framed it in terms of, I'm built to take that kind of punishment and damage. It shouldn't have been those guys. But at the same time, it's also, you know what? I'm a perfect physical specimen. I'd like to use it for something other than fucking dudes up all the time. Right? I mean, you can imagine. He's an artist. Like that's a thing you may not know. In the comics, Steve is an illustrator himself. Sometimes they have had him drawing the actual in-universe Captain America comic. That's his day job, right? Yeah. And so you have to realize there's a soul of an artist mixed in there. And there's probably a place where he has thought, what if my job weren't just wrecking people? What if I got to use this body for something other than that? And that's really elegant and cool. There's also an inelegant part here that I feel, God knows I love a shared universe, right?
Yes.
And I am not denigrating this emotional beat. It's a great emotional beat, but it's also a little bit nonsense if you look at the 616 as a whole. Okay, because he's like, oh, the Red Skull's dead. What if I can stop being Captain America now? I'm sorry. Did Baron Zemo vanish? Did Arnim Zola? Did the Masters of Evil? Did the Serpent Society? Did all these assholes that you punched as an Avenger that didn't have anything to do with you other than you were an Avenger and you were stopping them? Did they all just vanish? No, they did not. You know, so on one hand, it's kind of it's really a poignant question in this moment. Yeah. And I don't want to take away from that, but it's actually like, boy, I love a shared universe, except sometimes it knocks the sandcastle over.
Well, see, the thing is, though, I think that all of that extra textual context actually adds to the poignancy of that moment. Because, yes, he's wondering it, but of course he can't. And he fucking knows he can't. Yeah, but he starts to ask the question just in case. Like, and to me, that is where the tragedy lies for Cap. Absolutely. Is that he can't ever take a day off. He can't ever not be Cap, because there's one Cap, but there's 8 million of those motherfuckers roaming the earth, blowing shit up all the time. Like, it's exhausting. And I know there's Avengers, I know there's other people, you know, but Cap Takes a Holiday is not one of these stories. And I love the fact that that is inherent in the superhero job. Like, you're never ever done. Like, it's just, it doesn't end. You just keep going. And how exhausting that has to be. We usually don't address what that does to the person who carries the mantle of superhero, the weight of being a superhero, and what that actually means to the person, the human who is that superhero. They can never give it up. A supervillain can quit any day and just go off to Argentina and escape, you know, consequence there or whatever. But, you know, for Cap, he can't ever stop, because there's always more of them. There's always people in danger. And if you have that kind of power, I mean, you know, it's one of those cheesy things. We always go back to Spider-Man, but with great power comes great responsibility. And it never fucking ends. Your responsibility, you can never put that down. Everybody else gets to retire. You do not. You do this until one of them kills you.
I think, that's right? Mm-hmm. And I think that bringing in somebody like Spider-Man is a really interesting contrast there too. Yeah. Because a lot of times, and we will talk more about this in a moment when we talk some S.H.I.E.L.D. business, but a lot of times, or I should say traditionally, it has been, let's think about superheroes as police. Yeah. But I actually think they make so much more sense as firemen, right? Because there should be much more about saving lives and stopping disasters and things like that. But even then, it's an imperfect comparison, because Captain America shows up and he has a sense of duty and he honestly feels like he can't put this down. Spider-Man took that on himself. Right. Batman took it on himself, right? Superman takes that. Like, so many of them just take it on themselves and won't let themselves put it down. And again, you know, we don't want to turn this into a Spider-Man podcast, but it is really interesting how often Peter Parker has quit. Like, just quit. Yeah. Spider-Man no more stuff, but can't keep quitting. It's like a smoker.
You can't do it. It's just something that it is a part of you, that it's not a job. It is your identity. It is who you are. And you can't stop being that, you know? But yeah, you bring up S.H.I.E.L.D. Let's go ahead and talk about how I miss the show so much. Like, I'm going to start watching it again. I just watched an episode of the TV show Hacks, which is on HBO. Everybody should watch it. It's amazing. But it has Ming-Na, who was Melinda May on the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. TV show, in there. And I saw Ming-Na and I was like, oh my God, I miss Melinda May so much. So I have to go back to watch everything of S.H.I.E.L.D. But here we have S.H.I.E.L.D., you know, in the comic book, right? Of course, we cannot just be like, hey, you know, Cap, why don't you meet us at a place? They're like, we're going to land a helicarrier. Like, you don't have an Uber, a S.H.I.E.L.D. Uber that's just ready to like drive you across town. You got to grab him in a helicarrier. Feels a little drama queeny to me, but you know, whatever, fair enough. This is S.H.I.E.L.D. knowing what it is and being fucking S.H.I.E.L.D. over the top, you know. Yeah. But here we have Nick Fury. We're seeing Nick Fury, and I know he's Nick Fury because he's got the eye patch and he's very suspicious of everybody and he's always got a secret agenda. That's Nick Fury. That's who he is. But I'm like, he's white. Like, I don't. And then I remember you telling me a story about the history of Nick Fury and how he was white, but then they made him black at some point. It was Nick Fury Jr., right? And
but there's a middle chapter.
And there's a middle chapter I'm forgetting because every time you gave me the 4-color facts at a certain point, I usually lost the thread and was like, I've missed some of this because some of it was a lot going so much. But yeah, like feels wrong to me. And this was before, we had Samuel L. Jackson as Nick Fury in the MCU. Like this was before any of that stuff had been changed. And I'm glad it was. I really enjoy Samuel L. Jackson in that role. But yeah, like Nick Fury being white just feels wrong. Just feels wrong.
I have a lot of complicated feelings about the Nick's Fury.
Yes.
So a little history lesson. 616 Nick Fury has always been white. He was actually the star of a war comic called Nick Fury and His Howling Commandos. That's actually how he knew Cap during the war. Again, the sliding timescale makes it weird, but like when they introduce him as a super spy in the 60s, it's still the same Nick Fury. He's just in his, 30s or early 40s at that point, kind of thing. Later on, they had to introduce a thing called the Infinity Formula that it doesn't really give him any superpowers. It just retards his aging. And that's how we may see Dum Dum Dugan running around. Some of the other Howling Commandos, the same thing. So he's always been Caucasian in the 616. And for a person who loves 60s sci-fi and also read a lot of shout out Jim Steranko's 70s Nick Fury, Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. books, he has an infinite amount of like super spy cool for me. There was a publishing initiative around this era actually called Ultimate Comics. And the idea was that they were going to launch a separate Marvel universe that is very similar to the main one, but you can get in on the ground floor, right? So we introduce a teenage Peter Parker. He gets bit in the first issue and they're off, right? They introduce their equivalent of the Avengers as the Ultimates, which I will say is one of the only things that book gets right. That's a much better name than the Avengers because the Avengers is like, we showed up after everything was over. Who needs avenging? And, and in the Ultimate universe, there were a lot of questionable there's some good shit in there, by the way, but there were some other like questionable choices. And one thing was that they modeled their Nick Fury directly on Sam Jackson. And that in itself is not a problem. The thing that bothered me even at the time is not the race change, but the fact that they were unwilling or unable to make their Nick Fury as cool as the 616 Nick Fury. And so they borrowed Sam Jackson's cool.
Yeah.
And then when you get to the MCU and you have the actual Sam Jackson doing it, I'm like, fuck's sake. Like, I mean, sure, it works out, but it's literally like drawing a big circle on the thing that I had a problem with from the Ultimate Comics. And does it work on screen? Of course it works on screen. He's fucking Sam Jackson. But I have a lot of like complex feelings about this kind of lazy approach to Ultimate Nick Fury that bleeds over into the MCU and makes me prefer 616 Nick Fury generally. Yeah. No, I get it. But the thing is, I find it funny is that I don't mind, when a white character becomes black. And of course, this was a white character that was always white. But like, let's take a look. Everybody, but not to you,
not to me, because my experience was first with the MCU. But I'm fine with characters, being changed. It's just that I usually like it when it's in service of not so many white people. Like everybody's white in this.
Sure.
And I get it. Like that's, the way things were written where they started. I just feel like I really would have appreciated having some diversity in the storytelling. We have one woman and then it's all white guys. And Red Skull, I think, even though he is technically a red guy, like counts as a white guy, very, very much a white guy.
He would suggest to you that he's the ultimate white guy, almost as though he were perhaps an Aryan ideal of some sort.
It hurts. Anyway, so
okay. It does hurt, but let me point out. He wasn't really originally, because in the same way that Hitler was not really an Aryan ideal. But him getting into Steve's clone body is another little bit of tragedy at a meta level, because it was not an accident that 2 Jewish men took an Aryan ideal, wrapped him in the American flag, and had him punching Hitler in the jaw at least a year before we were even in the war. Yeah. That's not an accident. Yeah. That's on purpose. Mm-hmm. And so again, that's a little bit of that through a glass darkly stuff with Red Skull, you know. Yeah. No, I'm that's the other part of my big mixed feelings, is that, like, yes, please, more diversity, but do it, treat the character itself better instead of being like, have you guys heard of Sam Jackson?
Exactly. You know? Just riding Sam Jackson's coattails instead of actually writing a character that has that kind of depth on its own, you know, on its own as a character.
Now, that said, speaking of kind of like, let's have some people in here that aren't straight white dudes, I feel like you're warming up to Sharon, that I may have helped you. A little bit of 616 context may have warmed up.
You did. You definitely did, because I really felt like it was just like, well, we can't have him in love with a 40-year-old woman, so we're going to give him her niece, you know? And that's gross in a lot of ways. But, you know, but the reality of it is, yes, they actually did that. But also, like, you know, Peggy wasn't as central and her character was not as developed as she is in the MCU. So yeah, like I am warming up to Sharon. I do like Sharon. She does seem to be a developed character rather than just the pretty, you know, like coming in being pretty and distracting Cap. She is written as a real character. She's, of course, the only non-white guy, I think, in the whole thing so far. And she's still white, you know, so it's just, it's you know, it's something that, like, I'm feeling a little, there's got to be like a word for claustrophobic, but with white people, like Caucasiophobic, something like that. There's something like that where I'm just feeling closed in by all the white people, and I'm wishing that we had a little bit more diversity in the stories. Not to mention that there's not even a hint of LGBTQ anywhere in here. I get it. This was written a while ago, and things like that were not necessarily done as much, but, you know,
It's also a story that's rooted very seriously in Captain America's overall personal history, right? And this is, we kind of had this conversation a little bit when we covered Endgame, that we're stuck with, to a certain extent, because of the outside of the fiction, like the we're going to write mostly straight white dudes, you know, because we've been making comics since the 30s, you know, since the late 30s. And that was the mainstream audience. So that, air quotes, supposedly. So that's what we're going to do. And then, so anytime you want to do a story that really references a lot of that history, you are absolutely kind of
you're
stuck
awash
with those folks.
In,
So you either have to ignore the history.
trying to
just
find the
hemmed in
word
by white people.
Yeah, just penned in by white people. But, you know, I accept it. It's just something that is sitting with me. Okay, so the other thing
to Sharon though, she's Agent 13, right? And so off and on, there have been suggestions that the lower your number, the higher ranked you are in S.H.I.E.L.D.
Interesting.
Okay. Yeah. And so you're looking at just a ridiculous swath of people it just takes to run the helicarrier, let alone the actual, you know, sort of worldwide global organization of S.H.I.E.L.D. And she is 13th from the top. Like, it's, to some extent, it might be a little informed, except she's also honestly done a better job than comic book Peggy at keeping up with Captain America. And I mean, you know, like, she's incredibly competent. Like, she would not have this job of Agent 13, which is what brought her into interaction with Captain America in the first place, if she weren't just amazing and so much better than a lot of these dumb boys.
Well, honestly. Yes, but a woman has to be in order to get what a male Agent 13 would have half her competence and intelligence and be able to be there. So, like, the fact that she is the only woman that we see, and yes, she's worked her way up high, but that means that she's better than absolutely everybody else at S.H.I.E.L.D. All of these men who are there just, you know, doing their thing and failing upward. White men mostly, apparently also as well. So, like, it's one of those things that, like, when my, you know, feminist hackles get up every now and again. It's stuff like that. And I appreciate that we have that, but like we need more of that. We need to see more people rather than the one exceptional. None of these dudes have to be exceptional to get where they are, but the women do. Any people of color do. Like it's one of those kind of exhausting things after a while. But I do appreciate that. And again, like as progress is progress, it happens, and appreciating progress is not a bad thing. I'm definitely going to just let it go with that comment. I'm just like having a comment.
But I understand you completely.
Yes.
I understand you completely. Yeah. I mean, S.H.I.E.L.D. is actually a place that really pokes my personal politics really hard. Also, like I just look, I grew up with, my dad was a fan of Man from U.N.C.L.E. Like I really grew up with the Spy-Fi stuff, and we were at the tail end of the Cold War, but still that informs like a certain amount of our worldview and things that I accepted uncritically over the course of me being like a genre fan that now bother me a lot. And S.H.I.E.L.D. is like A+ top of the list for that, right? Because they're and we talked about this some with the show too, that there was no accountability, that at the end of the day, S.H.I.E.L.D. is super cops and ACAB, like just especially the last couple weeks, years, whatever. And it makes it harder. I really have to grit my teeth and just go with it and accept that that's part of the, the poison pill that I'm getting to have this fun adventure time, is that I have to watch super cop around the fucking place when I don't like it. And it bleeds over to Cap, honestly. I mean, because he is a government operative and has been from jump. So he is a super cop.
Yeah.
Even if he doesn't like it all the time. And now you can see why I like vigilantes and firemen as as comparison for superhero better than police.
I get it. I absolutely get it. And all of this to say, I haven't said this in this podcast yet, but I've said it absolutely everywhere else. So anybody who's listened to me before has probably heard this. But again, like people are, creating things within the context. It is never my intent to condemn a creator, writer, artist about the stuff that they create. But I think it is important that we look at it and ask these questions, with the lens of what we have learned, and kind of take a look at it that way, but without putting condemnation on the people who were writing and creating this stuff during a time in which that, first of all, they may not have had that perspective, because we didn't listen to people who were not generally straight white men. But also that, they just wouldn't have been able to, like, nobody who was in charge would have let them write that, so like these are all complicated issues, and we're not talking about the people, we're talking about the stories, we're talking about the culture, because all of our creative stories are a reflection.
The ideas.
They're reflecting us back at us, and if we don't like what's in the mirror, we're going to talk about it. But that's what we're talking about. We're talking about the mirror of us, not the people who made the art. There are some really bad artists out there. That's a discussion for a different time. I'm not going to get into that. I'm just saying right now, that's not a condemnation of anybody who worked on these stories. But I would like to close with aid. I mean, really advanced ideas in destruction, seriously, and then we've got crossbones, idiots with guns and bombs. I mean, like it's okay for story purposes. I think we're supposed to be rolling our eyes at these dudes, but I mean, still.
We're not supposed to be rolling our eyes at Crossbones, but I think that's specifically because he is a lens through which we are supposed to realize that he's doing the best he can with very rusty tools, right? Like he's a big damn deal, and you can kind of tell that even if you don't have a background. But if you have a background, of course he's there overseeing the most important of the three cities that Skull was going to blow up. But he's like, get your shit together, you guys, right from jump. And when Cap shows up, he's just like, well, that's not what this mission is about. I have to hang back and figure out what's actually going on. Like he's clearly a cut above, but aid is a bunch of fuckaroos. Like it's just on the label.
So, Joshua, let's go ahead and start with what is your favorite page? And we're talking here specifically about the artwork.
I can get down to one panel, actually.
Yeah.
The Pieta moment with Bucky in the dream sequence is fucking heart-wrenching. I mean, it's no less heart-wrenching for the fact that I know that's not how Bucky died, and that now, as a person who's read this looking back, that there's other, things afoot. None of that makes that scene less a punch in the gut. It's excellent.
Yeah, no, it's a really, really powerful moment. And like we say favorite page, we're talking about the artwork. Sometimes a panel is enough.
Yeah.
This week, I picked a panel as well. I love that moment where we see Cap hovering in the air in the Manhattan Underground, about to fuck up a dude's day. I don't know if it's supposed to be funny, but it is just funny to me. It's Cap just flying through the air, his shield right there. He's like, I am so done with this bullshit. And there's something about it that I love. And then all we see is the guy. He has no idea that Cap's flying at him. He's just like, about to get knocked into the wall. I love that panel.
I want to maybe give you like an added layer to that a little bit, because you were saying I don't know exactly where the line is, as far as like what's okay for Cap. And I'm not going to say that this is not okay. Okay. But I am going to say this is a scene, like that whole like flying in the out of nowhere, shocking that guy. And then he pins him to the ground and says, you know who I am? Like that's the, right. Mm-hmm. This is not a thing that Cap cannot do. So I'm not saying he's way out of character, but it is something that would be maybe more at home in a Batman comic book, right?
Sure, right.
And it's just looking at Captain America acting in a not entirely Captain America way. Like he's a symbol. He's out front. But here he is being fucking terrifying on purpose. He doesn't just start asking questions. He comes out of nowhere and then says, you know who I am. What? What is this?
He's on the neck. Right?
Yes. And he just doesn't usually do that. That's not, it's not wildly out of character, but it's not typical for him.
Yes. What this is chandeliering. Now, this is a term that I got from Brene Brown, right? Brene Brown was talking about this, that like when you have a pain point that has been hit too much, the second anything comes near it, you hit the ceiling, you hit the chandelier, right? So that's the thing. Yeah. And my therapist also, at one point, I was talking about how I had way overreacted to a situation. And in the moment, I knew I was overreacting to the situation, but I didn't know why. And she was like, yeah, that's what trauma does. Like the pain is so severe. It's so present that like when something gets anywhere near that space, like say here, I have to fuck up yet another bad guy trying to blow up the goddamn city. Then you overreact. And so this is what I love about this. We're seeing Cap overreact to stuff. And instead of saying, wow, isn't he a wonderful superhero? We're like, hey, something's wrong with Cap. Let's have a discussion. Yeah. Let's talk about your feelings, Cap, maybe for a minute. But he doesn't want to do that. So what's your favorite part of the story?
I want to say, to sing the praises of our illustrators. No, it's a good transition, because we talk about favorite piece of art and then we talk about favorite piece of story. And that is a good way for us to approach comic books, because they are both those things, but they're also when they come together, obviously. And there's a lot in that page, right? That is almost entirely carried by the art with like one line of dialogue. It's just, good. Way to go, comics. When you're awesome, you're fucking awesome, right? That said, looking at the story itself, like sort of the separate from the art, you always pull out I've read this a couple of times, and you are gonna find these really like subtextual, these really powerful character beats. And I am also, like, it's not like they're not gonna be there. But in this case, what I really appreciated story-wise, there was such a moment for Captain America where he's very out of his element. Like, he's trying to be a forensic guy for a minute, like at the crime scene. And then he's like sneaking around the sewers and doing Batman shit. And then he kind of fucks up and the bomb's going to go off. And he has this moment. If only I knew how to stop it. Oh, wait, I do. Not because he's an engineer, not because he's a detective, not because he's a scientist, but because he has fought AIM 1 billion times. And he's like, these assholes can't build
Tuesday
anything.
For him. Right.
Yeah. These dicks can't build anything that doesn't take a bajillion gigawatts of juice to do anything. Let's just cut the power. Beautiful. I love this.
I love that.
Star-Spangled Man with a Plan, chef kiss.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, and for me, of course, it is the subtextual moment, right? It is that moment when Cap is not saying, but clearly thinking, can I be done? And I love that.
And we know he can't, and he knows he can't, but just giving us that glimpse of a little bit of weakness. Not even weakness, a little bit of humanity.
A little bit of humanity, of exhaustion. He is so tired of these guys. And I love it. I love that we're acknowledging that has got to be exhausting, that we're giving him that humanity. I think that's great. And that's always going to be my favorite part, is when we see that human part of Cap dealing with all of this. All right, everybody, we will be back next week with Captain America Winter Soldier issue number 3, in which Cap visits France in the present and the past. The Red Skull's plot becomes clearer even as his murderer's plot becomes muddied. And at least one or two important characters who appear for only a page or two are going to make me ask, wait, who the fuck is this?
Thanks for listening to In the Gutter with Joshua Unruh and Lonnie Diane Rich. If you enjoyed this podcast, please consider talking about it with your friends, leaving a review somewhere, or supporting Chipperish Media, patreon.com/Chipperish.